Welcome everyone to the 2024 candidate learning session. We have a great panel of speakers for you tonight that are each the subject matter experts in their various areas. Our intention for this event is to pull together all of the various government entities that you will interact with during your time as a candidate. We don't expect you to walk out of here an expert, but I do hope that by the end of the evening, you will feel that you have a general understanding of what is required of you, and most importantly, that you know where to go and who to talk to for more information. You may not walk away with every single question answered, but I'm hoping that we will get you asking the right questions. Now, it's important to know that this is the first time that we're putting on this event, so we are going to do some more candidate learning sessions that are a little more comprehensive later in the spring, but we want to get your feedback on this. So at the end of the session and in the email that we send out to you, we're going to have a link to a survey. We really are asking that you take part in that survey and let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, what we can do better. This is all about providing information and opportunity for you to learn about being a candidate. We also want to note that there's a number of different government entities being represented tonight. I work for the City Elections Office. My name is James Eccles, and I'm an elections analyst. But I'm going to introduce you to a number of speakers who don't work for the city, who don't work for the elections office. And each of them have their own regulations and their own information to talk to you about. They are going to be the experts in their subject area, and we recommend you talk to them with any sort of follow-up. As I mentioned, the event is going to be recorded. We will also send out in the email where we provide the questions. The slides are going to be available to you. So if you feel like we moved past something too quickly, don't worry. Everything's going to be available to you to look at later at the end. Now, this session is intended for city candidates. I know there may be some people here who aren't necessarily a city candidate. Great, you're welcome. The more the merrier. Just know that a lot of this information may not be relevant to what you're doing. And if you're looking for information related to being a state or a county or a federal candidate, we recommend you go to a different source of information because this is going to be very specific running in the city of Portland. And finally, the candidate guide that we've put out for 2024 is available on our website. Somebody's going to put a link to that website in chat, and you can go there and download a digital version of the candidate guide. You're welcome to follow along. There will also be links to it using QR code throughout our presentation, and anything that's presented here should also be available in the candidate guide for you to go and reference later. All right, with that in mind, let's move forward. I'm first going to talk about what is going to happen with tonight and what we're going to go over. First will be my introduction to the office of the city elections. Then I will move on to the main content and give an overview for you of the process of being a candidate. I will also include in this an overview of the major changes taking place to elections this year. I then will pass the microphone off to Tate White, a strategic projects manager for the City of Portland transition team. She will discuss with you in more detail the role of elected officials in Portland. After that, my colleague Louise Hansen will come up and talk about the city's campaign finance regulations. Louise works with me in the auditor's office as the city's elections officer. We expect to be near the midway point by now, so we will offer a short break to stretch your legs or run to the bathroom. But due to the information that we're packing into this 2 hours, that break is only going to be 5 minutes. Once we return from that break, I will turn things over to Daniel Lukow, the Deputy Director of the Small Donor Elections Program, to discuss the city's public financing and how you can participate. I want to note that although this program is run by the City of Portland, it exists outside of our city elections office, so we brought in the expert in that program to explain things. Our next guest speaker will be Dominic Lopez from the Oregon Secretary of State's Elections Division. Dominic is one of the state's best trainers and will discuss how you file campaign finance reports in their system and other important ways you will interact with the state as a candidate. And then finally, we will have our good partners over at Multnomah County here. Kali Odell is Multnomah County's elections district and candidate specialist, and we'll cover what you need to know about the voters pamphlet and interacting with their office. And as I said, we will close out the event with a 30-minute Q&A. Please put your questions into the Q&A, and we will do our best to answer them either during that or after the event. Whew, okay, that was a lot, so let's dive in and quickly move forward. The Portland City Elections Office is housed in the City Auditor's Office, and we have a number of functions directly and indirectly related to the administration of city elections. Our primary roles include city candidate filing, which I'll talk to you about tonight. We manage the city elections code and the administrative rules that are related to that, and the manuals and trainings that come out of that. We also certify the election results after they've taken place, And we regulate city campaign finance, lobbying, and political consultants. Finally, we have a new mandate this year from the city charter to perform voter education. So that's become a big part of what we will be doing going forward. And this is a bit of that added outreach. It's also vitally important to understand what our office is not. We are not a source of legal advice. You may have a lot of questions about, is this legal? Is this not legal? We simply are not allowed to give you legal advice in that way. And I strongly encourage, if you are running as a candidate and you have those kinds of questions, to seek your own legal counsel. We also are a nonpartisan office. We are not endorsed or represented by any party or any candidate. And we don't endorse or represent any candidate. This event is a neutral, nonpartisan event simply meant to educate you. And then finally, we don't interact directly with the ballots and registrations. That's something that's done at the county level. We may sometimes help with that process, but if you have questions about the ballots and voter registration, I recommend you talk to the counties. All right. Now that you have a general idea of who we are, I want to discuss the general information you will need to know as you either contemplate becoming a candidate or move forward with a campaign you have already begun. I'll start off with what you can run for. Due to the changes in election method for this year, we have every single city office on the ballot. A more detailed description of their roles will come later, but for now, they include the mayor, who will be transitioning to a more executive position overseeing the city's bureaus with the help of a new city administrator. And then all 12 members of city council are on the ballot, with 3 coming from each new district. City council will now act more as a legislative body and less as an executive administrative body. And then finally, of course, the auditor will be on the ballot, but very little is changing about this role, and they will continue to provide independent and impartial government accountability. In order to appear on the ballot for any of these offices, you must meet some minimum qualifications. All of the offices I will speak about tonight require you to be a citizen of the United States, a resident of the city of Portland, and a registered voter in the city of Portland. All 3 of these things must be true for 1 year prior to the November election. This means that you needed to legally be living in and registered to vote at an address in the city by November 5th of last year, 2023. Now, anyone running for city council must also live in and be registered to vote in the city district in which they are running. If you move outside of your district or the city anytime in the year leading up to the election, you will disqualify yourself for that position. If you move somewhere else within the city, you might be able to retain eligibility, but be warned, at this point, if you move from one district to another, say District 1 to District 4, you will not be able to run in either of those districts because you will not have been able to establish a 1-year residency in either district. So you're welcome to move however you want, but be aware of those restrictions as you do so. Due to their specific role, the auditor has an additional requirement that you be certified as one of the following: a certified public accountant, a certified internal auditor, or a certified management accountant. Now, moving forward, the calendar that is displayed on your screen now can give you a rough idea of what to expect over the next year. A more comprehensive version of this exists in the candidate guide that I mentioned before, so I encourage you to check it for upcoming deadlines. A couple important highlights on this calendar are your window to file to be on the ballot between June 5th and August 27th of this year. It's also important to keep in mind that the ballots will go out to voters on the 16th of October. That means from that day until November 5th, election day, the voters will have access to their ballots and be able to fill them out and turn them into the county at any time. If for any reason you are unable to file to be on the ballot, but still want to run a write-in campaign, it is very important that you file a certification by October 29th, at least 7 days before the election. Without this write-in certification filed, you cannot get elected, no matter how many people write your name on the ballot. And of course, November 5th is election day on this calendar. Multnomah County will start making preliminary results available that evening, but keep in mind the ballots will continue to arrive and be counted after election day, and no election is final until certified. When you decide to file with our office to be on the ballot, you will have 2 options available to you. The first one is what we call a declaration of candidacy. You will file our application form, which will be available as a PDF well before we open up filings, or you can file using our online portal, which will be open on the first day of filing. If you choose this method, you will need to pay a filing fee. Those filing fees are seen on the screen. For mayor and auditor, they're $100. For city council, $75. We also have implemented a fee waiver process for those who may have difficulty paying the fee, and you can come and talk to us about more information on that. The second option to file is by petition. Going this route means that you don't have to pay any money, but you will still need to fill out the application form or apply through our portal. Once you receive initial approval for this method of filing, you will need to gather at least 500 signatures from individuals who are qualified to vote for the position you are running for. We highly recommend gathering at least 600 signatures, as history has shown that some percentage of your signatures are likely to not be qualifying signatures. You will then submit all of these signatures with the appropriate form to our office. We again highly recommend that you do this well before the last day to file. If for some reason something happens, you don't have enough signatures, some of your signatures are not qualifying signatures, you want to have enough time to correct that, and you do have the option to file a second or a third round of signatures with the right forms in order to have enough signatures to get on the ballot. However you choose to file for our office, you have the option to request that your records are kept exempt from public records requests. This is not information that we normally make public anyway, but we would be required to provide that information if a request is made. The exemption doesn't guarantee your privacy, but if you're interested in it, the option is available. Once we've received your candidate filing, we will begin the process of reviewing it. This process includes checking that you are qualified, that the residency requirements that I mentioned above are checked here. If you submitted a petition, we work with the counties to verify the signatures. If you submitted a fee waiver, we work with our city partners to check eligibility. It is very important to understand that during this review process, we may request additional documentation or clarification from you if what we have is insufficient. The documentation type that we ask for is going to be dependent on the context, but please make sure that you've provided to us the good contact information, and that if we reach out to you, that you respond promptly. We want to make sure that you are filed correctly and accurately on time by the August 27 deadline. Everything must be in by that deadline. All of your signatures, all of your forms, any fee waiver or any fee that is required to be paid must be in by August 27th for you to qualify to be on the ballot. Now that is the basic process for getting on the ballot. And with that out of the way, I want to pivot to some of the important changes that will be taking place in the Portland City elections in 2024. We will discuss 3 major changes that directly impact you as candidates. For additional city changes that came out of last year's or the 2022 charter amendments, I highly recommend you check out the city's transition team website. For our purposes, I will discuss the implementation of electoral districts for the first time in Portland, and then look at the changes to how we vote in Portland, moving to ranked choice voting. As I mentioned previously, the roles and structures of some of the elected positions are changing, and I will be handing things off to Tate White of the transition team to discuss that in more detail once we get there. We will begin with the new districts. Here you can see the final map that the Independent Districts Commission landed on. If you are interested in running for mayor or auditor, all 4 districts will be voting on your contest. But if you're running for city council, only those voters registered in your district will see you on their ballot. The districts are roughly equal in population, and for any more detail on how the commission arrived at this map, I highly recommend you check out their website or go to ours at Portland.Gov/vote 2024. This will be listed in the session later, and somebody can link it in chat. One of my helpers can link it in chat. One of the key differences in the districts is the initial terms of office and when you will need to run for re-election. District 1, District 2, and the mayor will always appear on the ballot during a presidential election year. So those offices will be up for re-election in 2028 and every 4 years after. For District 3, District 4, and the auditor, things start out a bit different. These offices will be up for re-election in 2026 and then every 4 years after during the midterm elections. This means that if elected to District 3, 4, or as the auditor, your first term of office is only going to be 2 years, and then you will settle into a normal rotation. This is done for the purpose of creating staggered elections so that every office is not being re-elected all at the same time. The voter experience will change very little from one district to another. Every voter will see 3 contests on their ballot in 2024, mayor, auditor, and the contest for the council in the district they reside in. After that, every voter will see either one contest for mayor in a presidential year, and then one contest for auditor in a midterm year, And if their district is up for re-election that year, you'll have one additional contest on their ballot for city council. Our recommendation is that if you are ever unsure, that you should use the amazing tool at Portland.Maps.com. This can tell you exactly what district you are in and give you a detailed map of the area. Another important change in 2024, we will now discuss the implementation of ranked choice voting. This section is not necessarily important information that you need to know to get on the ballot and is traditionally voter education material, not candidate education material. So why are we including it here? Well, we have big changes in store for Portland voters this year, and we wanted to enlist your help in educating voters on that change. You as candidates have a vested interest in making sure that Portlanders understand how to vote for you. And quite frankly, you will have far more direct face time with voters than we ever will. The better you understand our voting system, the better everyone you talk to is likely to understand it as well. I will discuss two systems of ranked choice voting that we are using for this election. The first results in a single winner and is being used to elect the mayor and auditor in citywide contests. The second results in multiple winners, in our case 3, and is being used to elect 3 councilors from each district through a single contest per district. It is important to understand that for the voter, there's no difference in how they interact with the ballot between these two methods. Either way, they will have a list of candidates for that office, and they will be able to rank up to 6 of those candidates. If they only want to rank one candidate, they are welcome to just rank one person as their first choice. However, we do recommend using all 6 of your rankings, and I'll get to the advantage of doing so in a moment. One important impact of this change is that Portland City candidates no longer participate in the primary. This means that the first time that you will be on the ballot is for the November 5 general election. Keep this in mind as you plan out the next 11 months of your campaign. However, it's important to note that the May primary will still be happening this year despite you all not participating in it. Importantly, that means that you may want to clarify with any voters that you talk to that ranked choice voting is happening, but not until the November election. We and you have to prepare for the November election, but it is still important that we all try to minimize any incorrect information among the voters. Finally, you may have heard that a ballot measure for statewide ranked choice voting is going to be on the same November ballot that you all are planning to be on. This has the potential for additional misinformation or misunderstandings around what will be happening in November. So I recommend you try to be clear and precise with your voters about what you are talking about. Here, we have a demonstration of what the ballot may look like. The counties are still finalizing their work on this, but this image can give you an accurate representation of what to expect. Shown here on this ballot for mayor, you can see the 6 rankings across the top and each candidate listed along the side, including a write-in line. Although filled out very simply, this demonstrates proper filling out of this grid-style ballot. In our experience, most people find it pretty intuitive, but we want to do our best to eliminate any potential mistake when filling out the ballot. As long as you only fill in one oval per column and row, as shown here, you will be good. I'm going to walk through the process of a ranked choice election, and then I will come back to this image to show you some typical errors we see and how our system will interpret that. Here, we have a flowchart for single winner ranked choice voting. Beginning at the start, our voter will rank up to 6 candidates on their ballot and send that in. Multnomah County will then count the top choice on each ballot. They look at the numbers and ask, did a candidate get a majority of the votes? If they did, then this election effectively looks no different than a standard election, and the candidate who received that majority of votes is declared the winner. If instead, none of the candidates got to 50% plus 1, or a majority, then the candidate in last place is eliminated. Then, all of the ballots that were counted for them have their votes shift to the next highest ranking on those ballots, and we count the remaining ballots. Once a new count is obtained, the question is again asked, does one candidate have a majority? And so on and so forth. This will continue round by round until we arrive at a candidate that does get a majority of the votes. That's single winner ranked choice voting. As I said, the voter has the same experience with the ballot for multi-winner ranked choice voting, but there are some differences in how we calculate those votes. The first is that we are looking to get 3 winners, so counting will continue until we arrive at all 3. Since 3 winners can result from this single contest, We also opted to allow for voters to write in 3 candidates instead of just one to give voters as much flexibility as they desire. Now, since we need 3 winners, we can't use our 50% plus 1 majority to determine those winners, because obviously only one person could get over 50%. Instead, we use 25% plus 1 as our threshold. This allows 3 winners to get over that threshold, but makes it impossible for 4 people to do so. In a minute, when I go back to the ballot images, I'll talk about some other advantages of this. Now, just as in single winner, if we don't have all 3 winners in the first round, we eliminate the candidate in last place and redistribute their votes. Different from single winner, we also redistribute votes from the winners if they get more than they needed to win. If we didn't do this, you could end up with one incredibly popular candidate getting 80% of the vote in the first round. And then your other 2 winners would be splitting the remaining 20% between them and would never get over 25%. Now let's walk through a very simple multi-winner election so that you can see it visually displayed. To begin, we have 5 candidates in this race. The dots each represent a vote for that candidate, and the line is the 25% threshold that they must get above in order to win. As you can see in our first round, candidate A must have been pretty popular because they got well over that threshold. This means first that they are declared one of our 3 winners, but it also means that we will shift the extra votes to their second choices. Once we do that, you can see that candidates C, D, and E all got some of those votes. And candidate A is left with just 25% plus 1 that they require to win. But you can also see that we still don't have 3 winners. So now we need to eliminate the candidate in the last place. Unfortunately for candidate D, the votes they got from A were not enough and they are now eliminated. We can see here in this third image that D's votes were shifted to B and C, and that puts B over the top. Our last action with this election will be to shift that 1 extra vote elsewhere, and in this example, it goes to candidate C and puts them over the threshold. We now have 3 candidates over our threshold, and we declare A, B, and C the winners. 2 things that I want to draw your attention to in this example. The first is that, as you can see, at the end, we arrive with 3 candidates sharing over 75% of the vote in that district. This is what we mean when we say that multi-winner ranked choice voting arrives at 3 winners that have a majority of the support of the district. Together, they will have over 75% of the support. The other thing that I want to draw your attention to is that you may notice in the first round of this election that candidate E actually had more votes than candidate C or D. But as the election progressed and votes were shifted around, they were not one of the candidates that got over the threshold. This is going to be important to keep in mind when you're looking at preliminary election results on election night and in the days following. With ranked choice voting, you may see someone come out on top at the beginning, but until they get over the threshold, they are not elected a winner. With those overviews, I again want to return to some ballot images and discuss the 3 errors that are most likely to occur. The intention of this is to look at what voter intent is when filling out a ballot and make sure that we're trying to educate voters on what will happen if they fill out a ballot in a certain way. The first is what we will call an overvote. As you can see here, this voter really liked a bunch of candidates, so they ranked 4 of them as their first choice. Unfortunately, as we are not able to decipher which of their first choice candidates are the most first, we have to discount the entire first column. However, we still want to count their vote if at all possible. So we shift down to the next eligible column and count that. In this case, candidate C would receive this voter's first ranking. The next error we see is skipped rankings. As you can see in this example, they gave candidate A their first ranking, skipped 2, gave candidate C their third ranking, skipped a couple more, and gave candidate B their 6th ranking. This ballot could be interpreted several ways, but we've landed on the decision to ignore skips and, when necessary, shift this person's votes to the next available ranking, regardless of how many skipped rankings lay in between. In this example, we have candidate A as the first choice still, but candidate C would effectively be their second choice and candidate B their third choice. The last error we will look at is repeat rankings. Here, we have someone who really liked candidate A and gave them all 3 of their top rankings. Unfortunately, we can't count any of the repeat rankings after the first one, and they will effectively be treated as skipped rankings. In this example, candidate A remains their first choice, but now candidate F is their second choice, candidate G their third, and so on. What is important here is not that there is a right or a wrong way to fill out a ballot. You and your voters are welcome to fill out their ballot however they see fit. However, we have to count every ballot exactly the same in order to remain fair. This means that we had to settle on a single policy for each of these situations. It is now important for you and your voters to understand that if you fill out your ballot in any of these ways, how that will be interpreted. We desperately want everyone's vote to get counted in the way that they intended it to be counted. Now, that is all I have for ranked choice voting, but please make sure to write any questions that you have so we can clarify anything at the end. The last thing I'll cover before passing things off to other speakers is an important resource that the city just launched both for you and your voters. And that is our new landing page for the Portland City 2024 general election. As I said before, the URL is pretty simple, Portland.Gov/vote2024. It'll cover all things related to ranked choice voting, the districts, candidate information, including eventually who is going to be on the ballot. And we have a growing resource library and FAQ that are great places to go and learn more about anything that is talked about tonight. All right. Thank you for bearing with me. Now I'll let some others get up here and talk to you about the details that they oversee and manage. Keep in mind that if you have questions on anything they speak about, we highly recommend you reach out directly to them or make your questions for them, as most of these speakers are outside of the city elections office, and they will be able to help you out far more than we can in those areas. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Tate White, a strategic projects manager for the City of Portland's transition team. Take it away, Tate.
Thank you, James. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tate White. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm a strategic project manager working with the Strategic Projects and Opportunities team, or SPOT for short. SPOT is currently part of the Office of the Chief Administrative Officer, so I'm a city employee, and our team's current focus is on implementing the charter amendments. We are separate from the auditor's office, where the city elections office resides, but work together to coordinate our work. The transition team has organized this work, next slide please, into two buckets: election methods and governance. We are hearing plenty of information tonight about election methods, so I won't repeat that. For governance, last year included work of the Independent Salary Commission to set the salaries of Portland's elected officials and revising the council organization and procedure code to align with the mayor-council form of government. Governance also includes updating the city's budget process, renovating City Hall, reviewing and revising city code, recruiting a city administrator, and future service delivery improvements, which are recommendations for the future council to consider. Changing to a mayor-council form of government with a city administrator brings many positive opportunities for the city of Portland. Structurally and operationally, the new form of government will be very different than our current commission form. City councilors elected from 4 districts will no longer directly oversee city bureaus. Instead, the Legislative Council will work together on setting policies to achieve desired community outcomes. Council has the authority to make appropriations and raise revenues and approves the city's budget. Key to Council's role is convening public meetings, gathering input, debating and evaluating policy choices, and adopting laws or policies to reflect those choices. Council also has quasi-judicial power to apply laws and policies. The mayor elected citywide will no longer serve on council. Instead, the mayor will lead the executive branch and have administrative authority. The mayor will propose a budget to the Legislative Council for consideration and adoption. The future mayor will appoint and council will confirm a professional city administrator. The mayor and city administrator will work together to implement the laws and policies developed by council and will manage all city bureaus. The mayor has the same authority as other councilors to introduce matters onto the council agenda and votes in the case of a tie. Work is already underway to renovate City Hall council chambers, and work on City Hall offices will start later in 2024. The transition team is leading conversations with internal and external partners to determine additional details about committee operations and onboarding the 2025 and future elected officials. So there's a lot happening at the city all of the time. All day, every day, city staff are serving the community in countless ways. All of these activities will continue to happen within the council's policy and budgetary framework, but with rare exceptions, they will require little council oversight or direction. The mayor, as chief executive, and the city administrator will oversee daily operations and provide required information to city council to help them provide a thoughtful policy framework. The dynamics of this leadership and policy ecosystem are depicted on the slide. Starting in 2025, City Council will have regular public meetings in full at least 2 times a month and can choose to increase this cadence if they would like. Council will also establish focused committees to provide a public forum for Council to discuss policy priorities and evaluate potential solutions. The Council's policy decisions shape decisions about programs and operations. Executive leadership and the administrative staff that they oversee will benefit from clear direction, freedom to act in accordance with legislative policy, and assurance of support from council. More specific and strategic policy development will happen at various levels throughout the administration, with major decisions at the executive leadership level. Next slide, please. On the right of this slide, you can see that if nothing changes, the new city administrator will have all the direct reports that reported up to the mayor and 4 commissioners. The timing of our budget process required us to make decisions about structural changes last fall so that the technical implementation of the changes can be completed in time for adoption of the fiscal year 2024-2025 budget. A logical reporting structure is foundational to the important long-term systems and process changes we also need to make. Operating as one city under a collective vision is an exciting opportunity for us to rethink and reshape how we work together as a whole city team. These improvements may take a long time, but we needed the structural foundation to get started. So on this slide is an organizational chart that council adopted last November. The transition will focus on implementation and prioritizing improvements to ensure a successful transition to this mayor-council form of government. Please note that some details on this chart are subject to change over the coming months as we refine reporting structures, and the budget process determines what we can fund over the next fiscal year, which spans July 2024 to June 2025. These decisions will be made by our current city council. Chief Administrative Officer Michael Jordan is the executive sponsor of the charter transition and convened an executive leadership team made up of bureau directors. They performed a citywide assessment of services and programs with the goal of developing a rational reporting structure where programs and services with similar missions are grouped together. The Chief Administrative Officer recommended a city administrator, deputy city administrator structure that you can see on the slide. A council operations manager will oversee staff that support committees and the legislative process. This group is anticipated to need to grow over time to be able to support more committees and other council needs. So Portland City Auditor is independent of City Council and accountable only to the public. The auditor's independent authority was not changed by the charter revisions. Portland's council clerk and supporting staff are part of the auditor's office, which is unique compared to other cities. Staff on the council operations team will coordinate with the council clerk and supporting staff, council offices, the mayor's office, as well as relevant staff in the administration to support committee meetings and the legislative process. That concludes my portion of the presentation. Thank you all for your attention. I'll pass it back to James.
Thank you so much, Tate White. So now I'm going to pass things off to Louise Hanson, the city elections officer here in our office. She will talk to you about the city's campaign finance regulations. Louise?
Welcome, everybody. My name is Louise Hanson. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the elections officer for the city of Portland. I want you to know that everything I'm going to cover today is also included in our newly released campaign finance manual, which also has more details. There will also be a QR code at the end of this presentation that you're welcome to scan to access the manual, or you can also find it on our website. First and foremost, I want to emphasize that I'm the first speaker in a series of speakers talking to you about campaign finance regulations. You will also hear from the state and the small donor elections program. We all have our own separate set of regulations. So please note that just because you comply with one set of regulations does not mean that you're covered under the regulations of those other jurisdictions. So you will really need to pay attention to the rules for all three. And with that said, here is a quick overview of what I'm going to be covering tonight with you. First, we're going to talk about campaign contribution limits that are enforced by the city elections office. Then we're going to talk about a few portions of the code and charter that we do not enforce. Lastly, we're going to cover disclosures that are required on communications to voters, including when you do and don't need them, how current they need to be, and what they look like. Our portion of regulations we refer to as the city campaign finance regulations. Under our regulations, these are the limits. Individuals can give any candidate or their candidate committee up to $579 in value per election cycle. For each donating political committee, the limit is the same amount. And for each small donor committee, there is actually no limit on how much they can give a candidate or candidate committee. And when we say small donor committee, what we're talking about is a political committee that is not accepted more than $100 from individual contributors during the calendar year. Please also remember that contributions has its own definition. And so when we say the limit is $579 or what the limit is, know that this can include money or also what we call in-kind donations, which are things like donating time or services. Under our city campaign finance regulations, in addition to the limits we just discussed, specifically participants of the small donor elections program are also allowed to receive any contributions that are allowed by that program. Just remember that that program has its own limits, which also might impact the limits in these other categories, like maybe individual contributor. Just remember that the program director for that program is also going to be speaking to you later tonight, it's the assistant director, deputy directors with us tonight to give you more information about the program and their contribution limits. Here is a reminder that campaign contributions are actually not reported directly to the city elections office, but they are reported and tracked in the state's ORSTAR system. The state will be speaking to you more about how to do that later on tonight. Another small detail, small donor elections also has its own contribution reporting requirements, but again, reminder, the city elections office, you don't report any campaign contribution amounts directly to us. So when it comes to calculating contribution limits, how do you know if you've received the maximum amount from a donor? You're going to be tracking the amount that you get over the election cycle. For the November 2024 election, everyone has the same election cycle, and it runs from November 9, 2022 through November 5th, 2024. So next, I want to bring your attention to some language in the charter and code that the city elections office is not going to be enforcing. So even though this language has not been removed from the charter and code yet, our office does not enforce any expenditure limits, meaning limits on spending, or funding that a candidate gives to themselves or their own candidate committee. I posted up in this slide the two different portions out of the charter. The language is the same that's included in the code, but we do not, again, enforce expenditure limits or candidate self-funding. You can go ahead and give yourself as much to your candidate committee or give your candidate committee a loan. We don't have any limits on that. However, the small donor elections program has different regulations around this. The reason that we're not enforcing this, just to let you know, is due to some court case law and some constitutional considerations. However, the language for the time being still remains in our charter and code. So next, I want to talk to you briefly about liability for campaign contributions. So if you receive a donation that's over the limit for the amount someone is allowed to give, if you do a refund or return within 7 calendar days, we will not consider that amount returned or refunded in calculating the total amount received from that donor. If someone donates more than they're allowed and you do not return or refund it in time, you may be liable for receiving more than you should, and your donor may be liable for giving more than they should. So as a best practice, consider putting information about what the limits are in places your donors will see it, maybe like on your donations webpage. It's something to think about. An extra reminder that sometimes campaign finance violations end up falling just under the city campaign finance regulations that the city elections office enforces. Sometimes they fall under the small donor elections program, and there are times where they may fall under both programs. So next, I want to talk to you a little bit about disclosures. So what are disclosures anyway? A disclosure is the information included on communications sent out to voters that support or oppose a city candidate, and the disclosures let the public know who is funding a communication that's being put out to voters. First, we're going to cover when you don't need to worry about including this information on your communications. So you don't need to worry about putting it on small items worn or carried by individuals, for example, like maybe a campaign button. You don't need to worry about it with bumper stickers or signs smaller than 6 square feet, maybe like a lawn sign, or in small amounts of literature that are distributed, which is 500 or less pieces within a 10-day period. So if you have an event and you don't pass out a huge amount of literature pieces, within that 10-day period, we wouldn't require you to include a disclosure on those communications. You also don't need to worry about including a disclosure if you spent less than $250 to create or distribute your campaign ad. You also don't need to worry about a disclosure on communications by unpaid volunteers that's personalized and without a template. So, for example, a texting campaign. If a volunteer is personalizing the conversation and it is not merely a templated communication, think like canvassing door to door, something akin to that, that would not count. But if there were, let's say, a text blast campaign with a pre-scripted information sent out by those volunteers, that is a communication that would count, and we would want you to include a disclosure in that communication. Okay, so now let's talk about when you do need to worry about putting a disclosure on your communications. Again, if you spent $250 or more to create that communication that supports or opposes any city candidate, including yourself, you will need to include disclosure information if you distribute it in print or on a website. Also note that the disclosures have to be prominently displayed, which means it needs to be readily comprehensible to someone with average reading, hearing, and vision capabilities. It also means for printed materials and websites, these two formats, that it has to be in a font of contrasting color from the background and in a font size that is the same size or bigger than the majority of text on the communication. Another place you're required to have a disclosure are any signs that are larger than 6 square feet. For example, a billboard. So for this to be prominently displayed, you also have to have font and contrasting color and a minimum size of 10% of the sign height for the disclosure. So where else? How about videos? Video disclosures, the disclosure must be up on the screen for at least 4 seconds, and the closed caption portion does not count. For audio disclosures, like maybe a radio ad, the disclosure cannot be spoken faster than 5 words per second. Lastly, disclosures are also needed on digital communications. And here I want to emphasize for you that there's a new change to our rules. If you're posting an ad to a social media platform where it limits you to 1,000 characters or less, or where adding the disclosure would take up 40% or more of your message space, then we will allow you to include the disclosure information by doing the following, which is you'll need to list who paid to provide or present the communication, but the remaining part of the disclosure information can be included by adding a link in your original post to an active website where the rest of the disclosure information is included for the voters. An additional reminder about the disclosures. So not only does your disclosure have to be included on certain communication formats, and it also has to be prominently displayed, but the disclosure also needs to be timely, which also depends on the format. So for example, for disclosure information to be current on printed material, it needs to include information that is current to within 10 days of the printing. For video or audio, it's information that's current to within 5 days of the transmission of that communication. Okay, so all this talk about when you need disclosures, where you need disclosures, and how you need to make them prominently disclosed and timely. What about what is in your disclosure? Let's cover that next. So first, you must list who has paid to provide or present this communication. After that, then you must list the top 5 contributors. These are going to be contributors that have donated a value of at least $1,158 to you or your candidate committee. If you only have 3 donors who have given that much, then you just have to list 3. If you have more than 5, you just have to list 5. If you're going to list, you're going to list these top 5 from the largest donors, meaning the people who gave you the largest donations, to the smallest donors. If you have 2 that have donated the exact same amount, then you're going to list the one that donated to you most recently first, and then you'll list the other donor that contributed the same amount. Also, for each of these top 5 contributors or donors, you're going to list the type of business that they're associated with. To do this, you will have to go to the NCAIS website. That website lists different business industries, and it has codes for these industries. Some are 4-digit codes, some are 5-digit codes. You are going to use the list of industry names with 6-digit codes. And then you list the name of the industry, not the 6-digit code. Lastly, if any of your top 5 contributors is also a nonprofit or political committee that is not a small donor committee, again, that's a political committee that's not accepting more than $100 from any individuals within a calendar year, then for that top nonprofit or political committee contributor, you will also need to list the top 3 funders of that political committee or nonprofit. Okay, so what does a disclosure look like with all that being said? Here we have a made-up example for you to look at. Let's break down this disclosure a little bit more. First, it lists who paid to provide or present this ad. In this case, it's Friends of Harmony Candido, totally made up name. Then it goes into the dominant contributors. These are the top 5 dominant contributors. We've got Razzle Dazzle LLC, Toothy Grins, Put a Bird on It, Spittin' Images, and What's the Buzz. Next, for each of those top 5 dominant contributors, we have the type of business industry listed next to their names. Each one of these is an industry name associated with a 6-digit code from the NCAIS website. So you'll see Razzle Dazzle LLC is a law office, Toothy Grins is a dentist office, Put a Bird on It is an environmental nonprofit, Spittin' Images is a commercial photography corporation, and What's the Buzz is a beekeeping company. Now, because Put a Bird on It is a top dominant contributor that's also a nonprofit or political committee, in this case, a nonprofit, we also have to include its top funders. So here in yellow, you see that Sweet Tweet Inc., Bird is the Word, and Time to Fly LLC are the top 3 funders of Put a Bird on It. So that's a review of what a disclosure might look like. And then here is a link to our newly released version of the Campaign Finance Manual, also available on our website, that again, you'll find all the information I've reviewed in this manual with additional details also included. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and please be sure to place any questions you have in our Q&A chat function so that we can answer those questions for you at the end of this session. And with that, we are going to take our short 5-minute break. It is 6:55 now. We'll come back at 7 p.m. Thank you all.
All right, we'll be starting with our next speaker in just a minute here. If you are not at your computer, I will give you a few moments to rush back, and then we will begin with the small donor elections section of our evening. All right, next up, we will hear from the Small Donor Elections Program, the city's public financing program. And this section will be presented by the Small Donor Elections Deputy Director, Daniel Lukow. Daniel, take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. My name is Daniel Lukow, Deputy Director of Small Donor Elections. He, him pronouns, and this is my 4th Zoom meeting of the day. So it's, but I think this is my favorite one. I'm looking forward to this the most. Happy to give you a training on small donor elections. Just a couple quick notes before we begin. Number one, small donor elections is an optional program for anyone running for city office. So auditor, city council, and mayor, anyone could take advantage of this program if they're running for those offices. So that's number one. Number two is that it's a small donor matching system, which is similar to programs in all around the country. And the goal is to match the small donations of everyday Portlanders, which does two things. It helps get big money out of politics and helps bring more people into our democracy. And so can you go back to the previous slide? And then the final thing is, so if you have more questions, you're welcome to contact us through our website, Portland.Gov/small-donor-elections. And you can take a training. In the training, we really dive into the details. We do them one-on-one. So you can ask, questions privately. And you just schedule the training by contacting, either me or my director. My director's information is on this slide, and my information is on the website, Portland.Gov/small-donor-elections. The training is required by law if you want to participate in the program. So definitely reach out and ask if you'd like to have a training. We're happy to offer one to you quickly. Thank you. Next slide. So the Small Donor Elections Program, as we said before, is a matching program similar to programs all throughout the country like San Francisco, LA, DC. And what it does is it provides a 9-to-1 match on the first $20 from Portlanders. And so what that means is if a Portlander contributes $5 to you, the program will provide $20 or 20 times matching funds. So a $5 donation from a Portlander comes with a $45 match from the city, from our office, and that results in $50 that you're walking away with. A $20 donation times a 9 becomes a $180 match. So you walk away with $200. So for donations below $20, the city essentially adds a zero onto the donation from Portlanders. The most an individual can give to your campaign is $350. And if they give that much, we match the first 20 of that $350. So a $350 donation plus the 180 matching funds equals $530. And that means you're walking away with $530 from individuals, including the matching funds we give you. The program benefits everyone, but one of the driving goals of it is to make sure that everyone, regardless of their income and the amount in their bank account, has a voice in our democracy. So, you can ask friends, neighbors, family members, people living on fixed incomes, if they'd like to contribute, and we'll match those donations and help amplify their voices in our democracy too. So that's how the match works. Can we go to the next slide? This is a step-by-step guide to Small Donor Elections Program, and I'm just giving you the high-level stuff. Again, you can reach out to us for a training, and we usually have a candidate guide on our website that's downloadable for you. We took it down to make some tweaks, but it should be up soon again. So step one is you comply with our program rules. And that's if you've opted into our program, you comply with our rules. Step two is you file this notice of intent which is just the paperwork signing up for the program. And you take the mandatory training, which is what I was talking about before. If you if you go to our website, Portland.Gov/small donor elections, there's a box that says the 2024 elections. If you click on it, you can see everyone who has filed a notice of intent so far, and it is updated as the NOIs come in. Step 3 is you start raising those matchable donations, and you start reporting those donations and expenditures to us. A lot of campaigns will hire a professional treasurer, or they'll ask a friend or family member to volunteer as a treasurer. And the treasurer's job is to then report all the transactions to our program. You're reporting both to our program and to the Oregon Elections Division, who I think will be addressing you all later. So we have our own reporting process. Step 4 is once you get enough donors, you then apply for certification. And all that means is you've met the minimum threshold of the number of donors required. If you, so like the purpose, one of the core principles of the program is we don't give matching funds out to everyone. We give it out to people who have proven community support. And the way you prove you have community support is by raising enough donations from Portlanders in our community. So if you raise 250 donations from verified Portland residents, you can then get certified for matching in our program if you are running for city council or auditor. If you raise 750 matchable donors given to your campaign, then you can get certified and receive matching funds for running for mayor. And then step 5 is after the election is done, you return the unused public funds to us. One other critical thing to point out, I'm sorry, can you go back? One other critical thing to point out about the certification is that, right now we're accepting candidates who are, applying to be on our program. Candidates can start receiving public funds on February 1st. That's when the certification timeline opens. And they can apply for certification until August 27th. So there's still lots of time to figure out the program's right for you and to sign up for it too. Next slide, please. These are the core rules of the program. And, again, if you sign up for training or you read any of our materials on our website, it covers much of what we're discussing here today. So, most candidates, when they run for office, they usually want to have some startup funds that allows them to just get their campaign off the ground so they can build their website, hire their first staff member, etc. And we want to support candidates in that effort. So that's where seed money comes in. Seed money is just helping you to get money into the door. It's the easiest kind of money to raise. You can raise up to $500 per donor and for a total of $5,000. So if you ask 10 individuals to give you $500 each, once you've reached 5,000 total, you cannot receive any more of these kind of donations. But the good thing is not only can people give you $500, but also it can come from nearly any source allowed under state and federal law. So individuals anywhere across the country can give seed funding, as well as organizations like labor unions, businesses, candidate PACs, nonprofits. So wide latitude to give seed money. Once you raise your seed money, then you begin to start raising your regular donations, and these are the donations that we match. We raised 95% of your donors will be individuals. There are some small exceptions for how organizations can contribute, but generally almost all the people who give to you will be individuals, because we want to raise up everyday regular people in our democracy. So everyday individuals can give you up to $350. That's the most anyone can give you for the election. But anyone across the nation can give you that $350. So if you have family and friends who live in Tampa, they can fully give you $350 and you can use that for your campaign. We don't match those donations, but there's still money that you can raise. Organizations are allowed to give to you in 2 narrow circumstances. And I mean give to you directly. Number 1 is the seed money, which we just talked about. Number 2 is if they're a small donor organization. And a small donor organization is any group where at least 90% of the funds they raise in a calendar year comes from people giving $250 or less. So, if a group of neighbors gets together and advocates for filling potholes and everyone throws in $250, that's a small donor organization. Many grassroots groups would meet that threshold, and certain labor unions likely would meet that threshold too. We have a special designation for small donor organizations because that's democracy in action. It's everyday people coming together, deploying their small donations to have impact. So that's why SDOs can give $350 directly to your campaign as well. Your campaign can also take a loan of up to $5,000 at any time, and you can pay it back with the campaign funds. So a lot of candidates will loan themselves $5,000 at the beginning just to make sure they have startup funds. Volunteer time is unlimited, so you can absolutely ask someone to volunteer to be a campaign manager or a photographer or any other professional service. They can volunteer that for you, and there's no limit. And you can ask for as much as you want from them. There is a special qualification for legal representation, and you have to check in with the state about their rules on legal representation. Finally, in-kind donations, which is just the good or service. So the example I like to use is if I gave you $350 and you're running for office and you bought a coffee machine for your office with that, that's a direct donation. I gave you the cash, you bought the item. An in-kind donation is if I just gave you the coffee machine itself. There's no exchange of cash. In-kind donations are a critical component to this, to any campaign. And I'm not going to go through all the details, but I'm just going to outline the principles. Individuals can give you in-kind donations, and they're limited up to $350. That does trade off with the regular donations, though. You can also take a donation of up to $10,000 from organizations. Goods or services that increase language inclusivity and or accessibility for people with disabilities. Those are allowed, and they can be indirect, i.e. like the organization goes out and contracts with an individual or a company to provide that language service. And then I'm trying to make through, okay. And then 501c4, C5s, and C6s, like nonprofits and some political committees, they can give up to $10,000 as well in kind donations. And there are some rules about how they can give and what kind of donations they can give based on the organization. And we're happy to go into that in more detail in our training. Next slide, please. Okay. This is a critical slide. So you're allowed to, if you opt into our program, you are allowed to raise money through cash, money order, credit card, checks. If you raise money through cash or money order, we do ask for a little more oversight because cash and money orders often have fraud slips into these programs. So if you want to raise money in cash, you can accept that donation and you can use it and we'll match it if it qualifies. But the donor needs to fill out a donor attestation document. And there's a template of this on our website, which you are welcome to use. The donor fills out the top part and signs and dates the form. And then whoever physically collected the donation fills out the gray box at the bottom. This is a very important part of our process. It helps protect the integrity of our program and helps prevent fraud. So, if you do not get a attestation document for a cash or money order donation, you must refund that donation. Checks and credit cards do not require an attestation document. Next slide. We do have campaign spending restrictions as well. We are working with taxpayer funds, and we're giving you the money to help advocate for your campaign and, be a part of our democratic conversation. So you can absolutely use the matching funds to do things like hire staff, buy ads, do polling, rent office space. But there are some restrictions on what you do with the public funds because we don't want the money to accidentally go to like enriching a candidate personally. So I'm not going to go through everything in detail here, but there are rules about what you can do with the public matching funds that we give you. And there are restrictions on those. However, you can use the private donations that you raise from everyday individuals and organizations to meet some of those budget needs if you'd like. Next slide. Okay, so those are the rules. Step 2 is you're ready to run for office. You send us that notice of intent. It is public at that point. So if you contact us beforehand, we do our very best to make sure that we keep the conversation private with you and keep it confidential. But once you file the notice of intent, it does become public that you're running for office. You can file that notice of intent up until August 1st, 2024. But the sooner is better because filing a notice of intent allows you to start raising those matchable donations, and you need time to do that. I think it's smart to consider taking the training, even if you're not sure if you want to run for office, because the training at least clarifies whether or not the program is right for you. And that's important information when you think about your candidacy or potential candidacy. You can email us and ask for a training, or you can also call us, and our numbers are on the website, Portland.Gov/small-donor-elections. And we're happy to help schedule that by phone. And you may invite anyone, a volunteer, a friend, a trusted advisor to the training as well. And then you can file the notice of intent. I'm sorry, the training deadline is August 1st. The notice of intent deadline is August 20th. But again, we do recommend filing it on the earlier side. And then both of those steps must be completed before you start raising those matchable donations. So that's why a lot of candidates try to do that as early as possible. Next slide. So then you start raising those matchable donations, and as we said before, you need 250 donors, which are everyday human beings who are at least 18 years old and are residents of the city of Portland. You need at least 250 of them to give you at least $5 to qualify for public matching funds if you run for city council and auditor. You need at least 750 donors to qualify for matching funds if you're running for mayor. And then what you do is when you send us the notice of intent, we send you log into a secure website, and that's what you use to report your donations and expenditures, which again, if you hire a treasurer or have a volunteer treasurer, that's often what the treasurer comes in. Next slide. So the public does have access to this, and this website's live. You can go to it right now. It's called openelectionsportland.org. And the website does show the metadata on how candidates are raising money, because transparency is an important component of our program. So on the website, if for anyone who raises money and they're running for office in the city of Portland and who are a part of our program, we show where they're raising the money from, how much is coming from inside Portland, outside Oregon, how much is from organizations or individuals, and are they in large or small increments. We are the first matching program to launch this kind of transparency website, and we're very proud of it. So again, it's accessible, and you can go and check it out right now. Next slide. Okay, once you reach enough of the minimum threshold of donors, you can then apply for certification. We do recommend going a little over. So even though 250 is a minimum threshold for city council, it's smart to apply once you get to 275 or 280, just to give yourself a cushion. You can start applying for certification on February 1st, and you can apply up until August 27th. We'll still give matching funds to you after August 27th, but you have to have applied for certification by that time. You can only apply twice, so it is a little high risk. And that's why we always encourage you to ask us for an assessment. You can email us at any point and ask us to verify how many donors you've raised so far. And we'll do it, and we'll get back to you and say, like, of the 100 donors you've raised so far, 85 would count towards certification. So we'll help you have clarity along the way. The matching funds are then directly deposited into your bank account. So backing up, you can raise an unlimited amount from your donors across the country, as long as individuals are giving up to $350. So if 1 million people want to contribute to your campaign, as long as you're each giving up to $350, that's okay. There's no upward limit on that. But there is an upward limit on how much the program can give you in matching funds. Because we're working with taxpayer dollars, we can't give out unlimited funds to everyone. So here's how that works. We can give you up to $300,000 in matching funds, but it's divided over 3 tiers. So if you're running for city council, once you reach 250 donors, it unlocks the first tier of funding. We go back and match all the donations you've raised so far, and we keep going until we have given you $100,000 in matching funds. And I think you need 556 donors giving $20 each to result in 100,000 matching funds. If you want more money, we can give you more money, but you have to show more community support. So if you get to 750 Portlanders giving you, a donation, then it unlocks a second tier of funding, which is also up to 100,000. And then if you get to 1,250 Portlanders, it unlocks the final tier of funding, which is up to 100,000. So the total we're giving you is 300,000 divided over 3 tiers if you're running for city council. If you're running for auditor, the most we can give you is 100,000. And if you're running for mayor, the most we can give you is $750,000. I will say though, and you've probably read about this in the news, there is a chance that the program may be underfunded by city council. We are doing our very best to secure as much funding as possible to make sure we're matching small donations from everyday Portlanders. But if the city council decides to reduce or to not fully fund the program, then we do have to reduce the match caps. Our oversight commission is actually meeting on January 17th to evaluate possible plans for reducing the match caps. And if you go on our website, you can see information about how to, submit testimony or witness or observe that meeting too, because it is open to the public. Next slide. After the election's done, you return the unused public funds to us. What that means is we just take back a portion of what we gave you, because it does belong to the taxpayer. And so if you have, let's say you, of all the money in your bank account, we have given you 80% of the funds in your bank account, then at the end of the election, if you have $10,000 left over, we take 80% back. The reason I explain that is because it's important to understand that the private donations you raise, you can still keep in your campaign bank account and you can use it for the purposes you choose. But the public funds come back to the taxpayer. Next slide. Okay, so that's the end of the training. Again, it's an optional program. We do encourage you to consider applying, and you can definitely reach out to us with any questions whatsoever. We're always happy to provide guidance, and our main goal is to make sure that you feel supported in your election campaign, and we help you avoid making mistakes. So we much rather you ask us questions and we help give you guys ahead of time than you accidentally violate the city law. So please reach out to us with questions. Feel free to request a training. We schedule them very quickly. And you can see our contact information on this slide as well. And the final thing I'll say is, this program does have a lot of rules. It is, at times complex to navigate, but ultimately it's about changing our democracy for the better and shifting candidate behavior. So by matching small donations, candidates spend more time campaigning in all communities of our city, and more people can run for office even if they don't have networks of wealthy donors supporting us or supporting them. So definitely do consider participating in the small donor elections program. If you have any questions, please feel free to call us. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and small donor elections. We're now going to move right along, and we'll have a technical trainer from the Secretary of State's office, Dominic Lopez, will be presenting on his office's work. Thank you, Dominic.
Yeah, thanks so much, James. And yeah, I'll just go ahead and dive in here. My name is Dominic Lopez. I use he and him pronouns, and I'm a technical trainer with the State Elections Division out of Secretary of State. I've been with the state for about 3 years, but my background is actually in the campaign and nonprofit side of things. And so a lot more of my experience comes from being on sort of your side of the Zoom, right? Working on navigating these processes from the outside. And so I hope, when I do my job, I like to make sure that I spend time thinking about how this process is going to be perceived and experienced by folks who are trying to navigate it on the day to day. And I hope that can come through in the way I talk about it here and the way that our agency can help make this accessible to y'all. One big disclaimer, I'm going to be pretty broad here. I think there's a lot of rules and laws that are baked into state campaign finance, which is really what I'm focusing on here. And so just know that, the details are available in a lot of really accessible places that I'll point out in our resources. But yeah, we'll go ahead and just jump to the next slide. So overall, state campaign finance, if I could summarize it as succinctly as I can, I would say it's ORS 260. That is a terrible summary, of course. If you want to read that, you can, but we have lots of better documentation. The better summary would be that campaign finance law is a combination of prohibitions and requirements that are put on candidates and other campaign entities in the state, though, of course, we're focusing on candidates today. Those prohibitions can include things like prohibition against personal use of campaign funds. So it kind of makes sense, right? You can't fundraise for your candidacy and then go spend it on a trip to France. Contributions in a false name are also prohibited. You can't give money to someone else and then have them give it on your behalf. That's a contribution in the false name. But I'll be spending most of my time here talking about those reporting requirements. Ultimately, though, one thing I want to make sure that folks are aware of is that this may very well be your first step. Filing for the city of Portland isn't until later this summer, but if you're already receiving funds or spending money on your campaign, then your filing obligations may have already begun. And I imagine some folks listening today have actually already created campaign committees and begun making those reports, because the deadline kicks in about 3 days after you start having money come in or money go out. And so a lot of the time we see people making committees and beginning this process months, even years before the campaign officially starts, right, when filing opens. Next slide. So if you haven't heard of it before, Orastar is our statewide database on campaign finance. People kind of joke it's a little janky sometimes and only lets you have one tab open at once, but we like it quite a bit. And we've actually learned from talking to our other folks at other states that are introducing campaign finance disclosures that Orastar is actually pretty robust compared to what some of the offerings are out there. It's got publicly accessible data going all the way back to 2006. And I think one of the best ways to learn, honestly, about what campaign finance from the state perspective looks like is just go over to Orastar and start poking around. Look up a candidate from previous elections or a ballot measure, see their committee, see the way that they've reported information. It's a really good way to just kind of get your mind churning about what campaign finance reporting at the state level looks like. For those of you who are old hands and have been involved in campaign finance with the state before, you may very well have an account, in which case, great, you're off to a great start. Also, don't make another account. This happens all the time. You only need one account to make multiple filings. You can, have multiple committees. You can be a treasurer on 3, 6, 12, 100 campaigns for all we care. Just keep it to that one account. We've had some problems with that recently. On the screen there, and I know it's really small, you can see some example committees. One of those is Dominic for dog catcher. Dog catcher is not a real elected office in the state of Oregon, but that's why it makes for a good example. Next slide. So I said I was going to talk more about reporting obligations. That's this. If you are running for office, numero uno requirement is that you maintain a candidate committee. The word committee has been used a lot today, but just to define it for our state, a committee is sort of a political and it's a fiscal entity, really. People use the word PAC a lot in common, parlance, and so you can think of a committee as a PAC for one candidate whose job is to elect that candidate. Maintaining that committee involves a lot, actually. It involves making sure that you have a treasurer, you have a location that you can be found, you have contact information. That information needs to be kept up to date, and there's specific deadlines that are involved in making sure that it's caught up to date, and you can be fined if you don't keep it up to date. The other half is reporting contributions and expenditures. So if you're you're putting together your campaign office and you go to Costco and spend $93 on office supplies and you spend that off of the campaign's card, that is an expenditure. And you need to go into Orstar and report that, you did a cash expenditure for $93 for office supplies at Costco, right? And that becomes public information. Likewise, if you spend your own money in doing the same thing, that becomes a in-kind contribution, a kind of donation to the campaign. And other folks have spoken about the differences between donations and expenditures, or in-kind donations. That's also a reportable item. One thing I'll flag very briefly here is as another form of reporting requirements, the state also requires political communications disclosures, more commonly known as paid for buys. So if Dominic is running for dog catcher and he puts out a mailer that goes out to a bunch of voters, it might need to say something like paid for by Dominic for dog catcher, committee number 21866. The requirements for these paid for buys are not dissimilar to the ones at the city level, though I can't say authoritatively that fulfilling one of those fulfills the other. I'll have a link a little bit later here that'll point out where you can get really good details on what the state requires for disclosures so that you're making sure you're hitting those requirements. The last thing I'll say on the reporting requirements is that small campaigns may have relaxed requirements. And this is pretty big. There is sort of two tiers here. There's a $750 or less tier. If you're running for office and you expect to spend or receive $750 or less in a year, calendar year, not election cycle, calendar year, and a couple of other requirements are met, you might not have to do any of this. Now 750 is a pretty low bar, but I do want to put it out there because for some campaigns, especially outside of the Portland area, if we're being honest, in a lot of small towns, they slide right through. There's no need to go through any of this reporting mumbo jumbo. However, if you are going to be over 750 but under 3,500, you can still make things a little easier on yourself. You still have to make a committee, right? So Dominic for Dog Catcher still exists, but you can file what's called a certificate of limited contributions and expenditures, which is just one button click. And by doing that, you attest you're staying under that dollar amount, and you don't need to put all those Costco-based details in every time you spend money. If you do go over the threshold, and that goes for 750 or 3,500, the next level of reporting requirements kicks in automatically. And so you do need, in all cases, to be prepared to jump up to that next level if that's the case. That being said, I do often talk to candidates who, upon hearing that say, okay, well, I'm just going to report the whole thing anyway. I don't want to, use any of these exemptions. I strongly recommend you use the exemption if you can. If you are a small campaign, but you decide to do all the reporting anyways and do not take advantage of the exemption, what you're doing is you're exposing yourself to the risk of making a mistake and getting penalized for it. And that sucks. We don't want to penalize you for something that you didn't have to do to begin with. So we really do recommend you use these exemptions if possible. Next slide. Resources. So there's a lot that you can go through. The first thing I want to point you towards is a new program that we launched last summer called the Clear Initiative. Next slide. This is what that landing page looks like. It's on our website. You can just see a couple of these icons. There's one that says campaign learning opportunities. So for example, if in a couple of weeks here you want to hang out with me again, I can talk to you all about voter pamphlet filing. That's an example of something that shows up there. There's a quick button to view campaign finance information. In the bottom left, there's a button that says registering a committee. So let's say that's us. We're not sure what we need to do, but we're going to click that registering a committee/filer button. Next slide. And you'll be given the chance to just tell the computer what you need and it'll tell you what you need to do. So I'm going to say what type of committee. Well, I'm a candidate running for office. Next slide. And then it's going to ask me, well, do you have an Orstar account already? Yes or no. In this case, let's say, yes, I already have an Orstar account. Next slide. And so it just presents you with the instructions. This is what you need to do to create a candidate committee. It's a pretty basic overview, and it'll definitely get the ball rolling. The resources I'm going to point to are going to give you more details on this, but it's a really friendly way if you're just getting started to really get your initial steps taken care of. Next slide. The other resources I want to point you toward, these are some of the big ones, right? These are our manuals. The campaign finance manual is sort of the centerpiece of all of this. It's big. It's a little thick, but it's very detailed. And typically, really honestly, most questions have an answer to it. If I get a call in my office and somebody has a campaign finance question for me, 90% chance I'm pulling up the campaign finance manual on the other side of the screen and looking at it while I'm on the phone with you, right? It's really helpful. The other ones there, Orastar users manuals do what they say, right? They are users manuals for the Orastar software. They're the ones that tell you what buttons to click in order to do the things you want to do on the computer. Next slide. These can be found on our website. There's a section under manuals, forms, tutorials, and election law called manuals and quick guides. I always recommend bookmarking this page because it is the one-stop shop for all of these manuals. I've highlighted the campaign finance ones here for you. This page is pretty easy to find if you just start on our website, Portland.Gov, but definitely a good thing to have handy. Next slide. Third, I mentioned political communications disclosures. We have a standalone page for info about this. Next slide. And that's what it looks like. So there is just quick tabs about what's required, what's exempt, what are the required disclosures. I'm not going to attempt to try to explain them here again because I want to be sensitive of time, but ultimately this is a great place to get those questions answered and you'll find some familiarity with the city rules. And the last, you're right. And the last thing I want to point out as a resource is us. I know the idea of calling the government for help doesn't ring true to a lot of folks, but in this case, we're really helpful. And I think that's probably true of anyone who's been presenting here tonight, but I can speak on behalf of state elections and the campaign finance team. We have an entire staff that's dedicated to supporting basically Orastar and Orastar users. If you call that number, you'll get an answer, or if you're not, you'll get a call back within like an hour. And if you have filed a committee, you will get assigned to a specific person on our team. I think this part's really cool. If you make a committee, you might get assigned to Michelle. And Michelle is going to be the person who you call. She'll be the one who responds to your emails. You'll get to know her. She'll get to know you. You'll be able to talk about what you're trying to do, and she can give you the best advice possible based on your situation. And you'll be able to get on a level of information that I think wouldn't be possible if we didn't have that sort of one-on-one relationship. So again, strongly recommend give us a call, send us an email. You'll be able to get that sort of initial connection made. And for the rest of your campaign, you're going to have an expert in your pocket that you can call and get really any question answered on how to use our systems and what it is you need to do. And yeah, with that, that concludes my part of the presentation. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Dominic. All right, our last speaker tonight will be Callie Odell from the Multnomah County Elections District. Callie will talk to you today about the voters pamphlet and some additional materials. Callie's title is the Elections District and Candidate Specialist. Please take things away, Callie.
Thanks, James. Hi, everybody. As James said, I'm with Multnomah County Elections. We do a lot during the elections process, but as a candidate, how you're most likely to interact with us is with their voters pamphlet. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about first. If we can go to the next slide. Hopefully you're familiar with the voters pamphlet from your own voters voting experience. As a county, we produce a voters pamphlet for all of our elections that include information about local candidates and measures. It is optional to appear in the county voters pamphlet. So if it's your intention to do that, you do have to submit filing that is separate from the candidate filing that you submit to the city elections office to declare your candidacy. And instead, you'll have to fill out a separate filing form and pay a separate filing fee to appear in the county voters pamphlet. Like I said, it is optional, but it is also a really great way to get your message, a little bit of your message in front of voters. And make a statement that goes out to every household in the county that maybe says a little bit about who you are, why you're running, what issues you care about. You get to choose what your message is. But this is a really good opportunity for folks to reach out to a large number of voters. I'm not going to get into the details tonight about what actually goes through in the filing forms and what those look like, because you're a pretty long ways off from having to fill those out, and there will be other opportunities for me to do some more education on that in the future. And instead, I just want to share some high-level points that will help you with planning for the voters pamphlet if and when you reach that point in your campaign. So one of the first things that's really important to realize, if you didn't already, is that the city of Portland spans 3 different counties. Most of it is in Multnomah County, but there are also little pieces in Washington and Clackamas County. And this is relevant for the voters pamphlet because we each produce our own county voters pamphlets. And so if you're running at large in Portland as the mayor or auditor, you might want to appear in all 3 voters pamphlets. And most of the city districts are located in at least two of the counties. So as a candidate for those districts, you may need to file, you may want to file with each county because we do have our separate voters pamphlets. And so we do require that in order to appear in each of our voters pamphlet, you will have to submit a filing form and a fee to each of the counties whose voters pamphlet that you want to appear in. So that's really important to keep in mind. To make things a little bit easier for you, we do use the exact same forms, voters pamphlet filing forms across the counties, and we do have the same fee structure. So hopefully that makes the process a little bit easier. While you do have to submit separate forms, there's a lot of, you can copy the same form and just submit them to each of the separate counties that that you want to appear in the voters pamphlet. I've provided an estimate here of what the voters pamphlet fees will be for the different districts. So anybody who's paying to be in the Multnomah County voters pamphlet, the fee for the Multnomah County voters pamphlet would be $300. It's based on the number of voters that are in the county. So that's why Multnomah County will be the most expensive. And then I looked at current registration numbers in Clackamas and Washington County. It's likely that the fee for Clackamas will be $25 and the fee for Washington County will be $50. But that could be subject to some variation depending on how voter registration changes. So you will want to verify with the counties closer to the actual voters pamphlet filing deadline. The other important thing to know is when the filing deadline is. It's 5 p.m. on September 9th, 2024. We're very strict with deadlines, so make sure you get your voters pamphlet filing in before then. You will not be able to actually submit the filing until after the candidate filing window closes on August 27th. So it's going to be, you'll submit between that window of August 27th and September 9th. We highly encourage that you submit as early as possible because that gives us a chance to do a more thorough review. And you can make changes to your filing up until the deadline. But after the deadline, we don't allow any changes. So if you file earlier, it really helps you and us, but mostly you in the long run. So highly encourage getting that in as early as possible. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. Just wanted to point out where you can find the filing forms on our website. I believe it's also available in Portland's candidate guide, so you should be able to link directly from there. But if you're ever looking on our website, we're currently focused on the May election, not quite as focused on November quite yet. So the easiest way to find those voters pamphlet filing forms is to go to our, right now is to go to the May 21, 21st, 2024 primary webpage. And then under our candidate filing information, you'll be able to scroll down and find the 2 forms that people who are filing candidate for statements in the voters pamphlet would use. And like I said, you can also use those forms when submitting to Washington or Clackamas County. All right, so that's my quick spiel about the voters pamphlet. And I'll just take 1 to 2 minutes to say that another way that you may choose to interact with the county is around ordering data. Some campaigns and candidates find it useful to order voter data from us. There are a few different options, but basically variations on lists of registered voters might help you identify potential voters or supporters. Depending on how there's some small ways you can customize the data. And so, some people find that really helpful for their campaigns. And we've gotten a few inquiries recently. So just wanted to make you aware that this is an option for you. And then also add that typically we would, because The city of Portland and most of the new city districts span multiple counties. Usually we'd actually encourage you to order this data from the state elections division, since they're able to pull data for all Portland and all Oregon voters. And the counties can only provide information for voters that are registered in our county. But because we're in a little bit of a weird place right now, and these city districts are brand new, we're still in the process of integrating them with our voter registration system. So exact data isn't currently available, but if you're really excited to order data and you want some or need some in the coming weeks, we highly encourage you to reach out to us at the county, and we'll work with you to get lists that are as close as possible to a reflection of those districts. If you're looking at a mayoral race or an auditor's race that's citywide, I would recommend ordering from the state. But for now, if you're in a district, it might be helpful to work with us at the county. You're also welcome to reach out to the state and see what they can provide. But we are happy to work with you and get you the best data that we currently can. And I'll just mention, we also have these fees listed at the bottom. We have the same fees at the county that they charge at the state, which is that we charge a $25 setup fee, and then it's 2.5 cents per 100 records, voter records that are listed in the data. So just something to be aware of if you're thinking of ordering. And I've included the link at the bottom to where you can get more information about ordering data, either from the county or from the state. And that ends my presentation, other than to, like everybody else, encourage you, if you have any questions about the voters pamphlet, please feel free to reach out to me or my colleague, Edward Gutierrez. We both work on the voters pamphlet and are always happy to answer questions and help you navigate that process or give you any information. So you're welcome to call or email us anytime during business hours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kali. And that will conclude our presenter speaker portion of this presentation. We're now going to move into the question portion. I first asked that all the presenters, if you could just turn on your cameras, and then if you were asked a question,